Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to 3D animation with Blender, part one, getting started with Blender. I want to say hello to everybody and welcome to our live webinars. Want to thank all of our partners in this project. We have the Canada Council for the Arts, and also our library partners. So we have the Blue Mountains Public Library, we have the Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. And we sent an email out to everybody. And the great thing about today's presentation is that you can access Blender software. It's totally free. And this is something that you can just go and download. It's Mac, Windows, and Linux available. So it's blender.org. We sent everybody that link. And everything is crowdcast. By registering, being part of this, you can rewatch this. So don't worry if you're taking some notes or following along and you have some, questions you want to review or look at things, you can rewatch this and go over things again. So that's really the great part of the process here, that we're able to do that. And so let me move on here to, we'll do this presentation. Leon, he's a Collingwood based animator here locally, and he'll be taking us through this journey. So let me pass it over to Leon. Here we go. Okay, Leon, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here you go. You're off.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. So welcome to the first workshop for Blender. Hopefully all of you have downloaded the Blender program. It's one of those, this is like my favorite program because it's free and it's a very powerful program that you can do a lot with it. So if hopefully you have the Blender program so you can follow along. If not, then that's fine too. So you can always rewatch this video and you can follow along after that. All right, so without further ado, let's start working on, let's start with the Blender program. So when you open Blender, you have this view in front of you. This is what they call it, the 3D viewport. So I'm not sure like how many of you have experience with 3D, but like if not, this is like a basic 3D program. Pretty much any other programs out there, Maya, 3D Max, they kind of have a similar look on it, but like the Blender is free, obviously, so you can play around with it and then you don't have to pay for it. Okay, so the version of Blender that you have, because Blender keep updating their stuff pretty frequently, and my program here is not exactly up to date, but the user interface that you see here should be similar because they haven't overhauled the whole thing yet. Like this, I think this is a pretty recent, like last year, I think this new user interface and all the look of Blender that you see right now is pretty brand new. But if you download it, you should be able to follow along without needing to worry that you have to keep upgrading your Blender or you're not going to be able to follow along with this tutorial. Anyway, so let's start. So when you open the program, you will see these three objects here. And this is like a default scene for Blender. And what it is basically this is the mesh. And you can, that's just like any mesh is any geometric basic stuff. So like you can have cube, cylinder, cones, and all that stuff that you can have. But the default for Blender is cube. And this is where you're going to shape your where you're going to shape your model into something, whatever it is that you want to do. And you don't necessarily need to use this cube. You can start with something else, but Blender always have it with cube. And over here on the left side here, this is your camera. Basically, like when you render, after when you finish your scene and you start rendering, this is where the view of this camera is where you're going to see your final piece. So if I see my camera, this is the look of the final piece. If I'm rendering it, it's going to be looking like this. And over here on the right side here, it is what we call it, the light. This is the lighting for the scene. So think about it. If you're in the photography, you have a bunch of lights to illuminate your model. That's essentially the same thing. It's a basic light and a basic camera, and you have a basic shape to start with. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through how we're going to navigate through Blender. This is like the most basic things that you need to learn before you start doing anything. And after that, we're going to start modeling something. And when we're gonna start modeling a crate, I make a sample later on, but we can take a look at it. But I think the best way to learn Blender is to start modeling sooner, because Blender is a very in-depth program. So there's a lot of things in the Blender that you probably never going to use. So because Blender can do a lot of things, and it might necessarily not something that you want to do. So you don't necessarily need to learn that. But for the basic modeling is probably, if you want to create something, you have to model a character or an object or anything like that. That's basically what we're going to do, to just create something with Blender. And the sooner you can model, the faster you will learn. At least that's how I learned Blender, is by start modeling and learning at the same time while I'm doing that. But before we do that, we're just going to go through quickly how we're going to navigate Blender. So first, how to move around the 3D viewport. So you can, because it's 3D, you can rotate and you can pan, and then you can zoom in and scroll, right? This is the basic 3 navigations of Blender. The new user interface actually make it easier, because if you see to your top right here, that is your rotation, right? This is all you can rotate it, and then you can zoom in, right? And then you can pan. So this all 3 basic navigation that you need to know how to move around Blender. Now, the shortcut keys for this is, if you have a mouse, the middle mouse, if you press the middle mouse, you can rotate, right? And then if you have a scroller in the mouse, then you can scroll with your scroller, and then that's for zoom in. And then to move in 3D viewport, you press Shift and then middle mouse click. You will be able to move your screen anywhere. Again, like if I like to use shortcut key, something like this, you probably need to remember that and make it easier. But let's say if you're modeling with a laptop, this little gadget here is very handy to have to navigate the 3D viewport. Okay, so this 2 here is just basically, this is for toggling to your camera view. And this is to switch from the perspective view to the orthographic view. Orthographic view is basically just to see the object in a 2D, in a more like in a 2D flat way of seeing. So if you see a blueprint, you have to see it like how the object has to be in a size. Like, I mean, if you see it in real life, you'll see it in the perspective, but the orthographic is just so when you're modeling, you can see the measurement in a more accurate. So, okay, so now we're going to perspective view. All right, so we're not going to use this, the camera and the, sorry, we're not going to use the camera and the light yet. So what I'm going to do is to hide them first. So now we're going to the right here. This is your kind of layers, and this is your property to see what your property of your scenes is. As you see, I have my camera, I have my cube, I have my lights here. So, and this is the to hide and unhide, right? And this is basically what they call a grouping, and Blender just calls a collection. And so this is, we're going to touch on this property here of later on once we start when we start doing some modeling. So I'm just gonna go through this really quickly. That's this is all different property. This is how you render, property for renderings, and this is the output for your rendering. As many things here that you can go through it and play around with it. But again, like, it's not something necessarily that you need to know everything here. And the goal is to help you to get started and creating something with this program. So, okay, so next one here, if you go to the left here, this is basically your selection menu. So again, like, you don't really need to know everything here. All you need to do is, it's the same thing. This is rotate cursor, and this is just like a selection tool, right? Now, the selection tool, if you left click on your mouse, you can have and left click and hold, you can have this box here is to select multiple objects. So let's say if I have another objects here on the screen, so let's say if I want to multiple select this, you can do it with two different ways. You can actually just make a box and we'll select everything. And if you click anywhere outside of your mesh, it will deselect those objects. Or if you just want to select, let's say, these two, you can click on the objects and then you can shift and left click on another object that will select both of them. Or you can just left click and then make a box selections, right? Now, for right click, that will give you another option that's depending on what you're clicking, what your cursor is clicking. Right now, I'm at the mesh object. If you right click on it, it will give you selections of different things that you can do with it, right? So let's say in here, so you can mirror, you can set your origin and all these different selections there. And we'll go through that later on. Now, underneath here, this is your timeline, or your where you're going to start. You're going to use this when you start animating, but we're not going to touch this right now because we're going to concentrate on modeling. So I'm just going to close this. And if you see at the bottom here, these are, what do you call it again? It will tell you what is it that you can do with it. So let's say in here, you can, same thing, if you left click, you can select, right? See how that thing's changed every time I do it. Let's say if I press shift, you can see like how, like what the shift can help you, and that's will tell you exactly what you can do with the key. So every time I click different key, that will change into what is it that you can do with that key. So it's good to know. It's just a little help there with the Blender to make it easier to navigate through this program. Now it's on the top here. You can lay out modeling. It's basically a different 3D viewport that's will, specifically doing what you need to do. So like for modeling, this is the viewport will customize specifically for modeling, and this is for sculpting. As you can see, all the left side here, all the choices are different. And this is basically a modeling for sculpting options that you can use, and we're not going to touch that. And this is for UV editing, texture paints, and so on and so on and so on. So we don't really need any of these at the moment. So I'll just go to the layout, and you can just have this for now. All right, so next is, if you go to the corner here, which is when your cursor becoming a plus sign like that, that's, if you can use that, and if you right click on it, it will give an options to split your area, your 3D viewport. So let's say I'm going to do the vertical split. You can see there's a line here. And if you click anywhere, and your viewport will be divided into two. So the same thing, if you want to divide it, you can, let's say, divide this into a horizontal split. So there you go. So you get, so now you can, do your modeling here, maybe your texture in here, and your UV editing in here. This is just for later on, once we start modeling an object, character, or anything like that. So let's, and then if join area, you can say it's depending on which arrow is going, so that will have that area will join with the other one. So, and then the swap area, basically just swapping your area. So, okay. That's pretty much to start with. I know there's a lot of options here that you probably may or may not use in the future, but that's the basic navigations of Blender. So we're going, now what we're going to do, I'm just going to open my scenes here. So open, right. So this is the crate that I model. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to model this crate. And hopefully by the end of the workshop tutorials, after modeling this crate, you'll have a better understanding on how to create your model and your art, and how to texture it, how to unwrap it, and all that's basic things that you need to know to start modeling your characters or your object. Okay, so as you can see it in a render view. Now the render view, Blender, this new Blender has 3 different Blender engine. Basically, it's a 3 different way of doing rendering, and we'll touch on that later on. But like I just quickly, if you go to the render, right now I'm in cycles, and then you have the EV, and then you have the I guess the workbench is the normal Blender. I guess this is the old Blender engines. We don't really necessarily need to use this for. The one thing that the new Blender has is EV render engine, which is amazing. It's essentially like a real-time rendering. So as you model, you can see the changes that you can right away, and then you can make the changes to your textures in a real time, and even the lightings and everything. So this is, if you play games, that's basically what they use, a real-time engine to render your whole scenes while you're playing the game. So, but if the cycle render, those are mostly used for, let's say, if you're creating a feature films or something like that, that will give you a high resolutions of your render, and looks will be more closer to a realistic look than the EV render. All right, so let's open a new scene, and we can just start quickly how to model this grid. General, don't save. Okay. All right, so again, I'm going to hide this. You don't need to hide it if you don't want to, but I will generally just have a clean 3D port before I start modeling. Okay. So another shortcut key that's very important to know, the number pads on your keyboards on your right side. If you press number 5, that will change between your perspective and your orthographic view, which is basically this, right? It also, if you press number 1, you will see your objects in the front view. So you can see the front orthographic view. And then 3, you'll see it on the right orthographic view. And number 7, you have top orthographic view. So that number will be 5, 1, 3, and 7. And this is very important to know before we start modeling because when you draw some things on papers and then you scan it to have this, or on Photoshops you want to bring it to Blender as a reference, that orthographic view is good to have how you shape your model base and to a more accurate look. Oh, right. Before we move on, how to move your object. Basically, like if you click your objects, how you move your object, that's very important too. So the shortcut keys for this is G is for grabbing the object. So if you click the object and press G, you'll be able to move your objects anywhere, okay? And then if you press R, that's for rotate. So you can rotate your object. Okay, and then if you press S, that's for scaling the object. So those are the basic thing to move your object around and resize it and rotate it. Now, obviously, Control Z is to undo. And yeah, so that's important to do because that's how we're gonna, we're gonna need to use that a lot in order to start modeling. And the next thing you need to know is to switch between the object mode into how you're going to edit your object. So that's here. Once you click on your object, if you go to the left side here, it says object mode. Okay. If you click on it, you have different options that you can use: edit mode, sculpt mode, vertex paints, and all that stuff. Right now, we're going to just use the object and edit mode. So once you click edit mode, then you can start editing your object. Right now, it is in vertex mode. As you can see, this little black dot here, you can move that black dot, and then you can shape it anywhere you want. And then if you go to the left here, if you click on the next, this is the vertex mode here. If you click to the middle here, that will help, that will select your edges of your object. And if you go to the right here, it will select the whole face of the object. Right, so you're moving the whole face instead of just the vertex of the object. So this is all very helpful once you start going in depth into modeling. So right now, to start with, I'm going to start modeling the crate. So I'm going to be in the face mode, and I'm going to the front orthographic view, which is number 7 on your numpad. Sorry, that's the top. Number 1 is front orthographics. So again, I select the top, and then I go to my numpad and press 1. That will bring me to the front orthographics. The next thing I want to do is to bring this down. So that means I have to grab it, right? And then I bring it down to here. There. Now your cube is more like smaller. And this will be your the crate base, and we're going to use this as a reference for everything else. Now, next one. The next step is to add another object. So if you press the shortcut key of Shift-A, sorry, like we need to go out to object mode first, okay? And then deselect the object, and then we can press Shift-A. That will add a new, we're gonna add a new cube. And then we're going to size this as like a block of wood for the frame of the crate. So if I scale this, I press S, this scaling is uniform, right? So what happens if we just want to scale, we just want to scale the width of the cube instead of the whole thing? So all we can do is press Shift, and then we're going to scale it, press S, and then X. see the line there that start? We're going to scale it in x-axis. So because this is a 3D program, it's essentially like you have the x, y, and z axis, right? The blue line is your basically up and down, and then the x-axis is going from the front view here. You can go side to side, so we want to change and then the y-axis is here, side by side. There's right. So if you want to manipulate your objects into and then just resize it in a specific direction, like let's say in here now, I want to scale this object in the y-axis, so it looks like a block. So I want to scale it. So I'm going to press S and then Y, which is y-axis. So in that you'll be able to resize your object in y-axis only. Again, like if you just press scale, which is press S, that will just resize the whole thing. That means you're resizing the X, Y, and Z. But if you want to scale it on specific axis, you have to press the S and then which axis that you want to scale it with, which is like X, Y, or Z. So scale. So, and then we're going to move this. I'm going to scale it again in the x-axis to make it. I'm going to move it to the corner of this base. And it's going to the front. Something like that. All right. So there you go. You got your first beam. Now, another thing that this is the next thing that we can use is use modifier. Before we do that, we can subdivide this. Okay, I'm pressing tab at the moment to switch between objects and edit mode. If you don't remember the shortcut keys, you can always go here, objects and edit mode. When you look at a block of wood and creates like in real life, you don't have like a perfect angle here. There's always kind of a little bit of a bevel around it. So to make it a bit smoother, so what we can do is going to modifier here. If you go to the right side on your property tab, it's like a wrench icon here. If you click on that, that's called the modifier. So we can add the modifier, and that will give you options for different things that you can modify your objects. Now, this is really good because when you add this, it doesn't really change your number of triangle. With triangle is how you calculate the objects and how detailed the object is. The higher the triangle number, the longer it will take. I mean, the higher the triangle numbers, the more realistic you can make the object, but also the longer it takes to render the object. So generally, like if you're working in feature films, it doesn't really matter like how much triangle you have because you want it to be as detailed as possible. But if you're working in a game, people's computers are different, or like your console have a limitation. So generally, they want their object in the lower number the objects in the lower number triangles. So by using, the reason why I was kind of pivoting on that, but the reason why I was talking about that is because when you're adding a modifier, it's not going to change your triangle number. It's just kind of like a camouflage on top of your object. So you still have a low triangle number, but you can still have that look of a higher end triangle, like a higher details look. So in this case here, the subdivision service modifier is to make your cube to be more smooth. So right now it doesn't look smooth. So if you go to your modifier property here, this is level 1 here, and if I go to level 2, it will slowly make your object smoother, right? But right now, usually I just use 2, which is really good. But if you go to your edit mode, you can see that your number, the rectangle, the cube is still the same, right? It's just that it will, because of the modifier, it will help you to, and whatever no matter what it is that you change in your original cube, it will affect your modifier as well. So right now, I want to make this object to look like a block of wood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to the edge, and I'm going to select the edge here. Now you can use 2 ways. You can subdivide it. Again, this right click. If you right click on the edge, you can have another selections here, and you can subdivide it. Or the shortcut keys is Control R. And you see that's you can see it here. You can subdivide your objects. So what I'm going to do is click on that. Now, if I move this edges here and I bring it up, you'll see what happened here. If I click one edges and double click on it, it will select the whole edges. Now, in order to move this within the cube, you want to have if you press G twice, like G is basically moving your, moving your edges, but you don't want you want to be uniform. So if you press G twice, you can move it up and down without within the objects here. So I can move that one up. See there? You see how the modifier, like underneath the objects, changes shape because I'm adding more edges. So what I want to do is make another. I'm going to subdivide it again, cut it, and then I'm going to move it again up here in order to make it smoother. Now I want to do the same thing, but going down this time. Make another one, Control R. Bring it down. Now, it doesn't look like a block. So I'm going to do, it's going to simple instead of cat multiply. So you don't round it the whole edges. You just make it simple. Not sure why it's not working. Just sorry about that. Just not sure why it's not working. All right, so I guess we'll use a different modifier for this one. I'm not sure why it's not working like that. But let's use a different modifier. Let's remove that. What I'm going to do is to use the bevel modifier. Now, so in here, we can play around with the amount of the bevel. I'm going to remove this, dissolve the edges. Getting close there. Aha. Okay. Sorry. Like I see what the problem is. Let's go back a little bit. I'm going to undo this. Let's see what's the problem. Okay. So let's go to the subdivision service again. What we can do is to create another subdivisions and then bring it here. There you go, to the right. And then we're going to have another one, bring it to the left. There, voila. And you can see it looks a little bit more like a block of wood. So again, sometimes you don't want the wood to be so straight. So what we can do is to subdivide your objects again, and maybe going to scale it. And subdivide it again, and I'm going to move it like that. As you can see it more. To make it a little bit unorganic, to look at more like an organic feel, because sometimes you don't want things to be perfectly straight and perfect, and that's just, especially when you're dealing with the nature, nothing is completely perfect. So you want to, and this is something that you can play around as an artist, that you can see and make it different, and use your artistic ability to make it not exactly real, but it's real. All right, so I'm just gonna do a little bit more here. I'm gonna use a little bit of the vertex. All right, so that's not too bad. Now it's before we finish up, like I'm just going to duplicate this around and then put it around the base of the crate. So let's do that. I'm going to go to the top view. And then if you press Shift D, you're going to have a duplicate. You'll be able to duplicate that object. And you got to be in object mode to do this, or else it's gonna. And you want to rotate this so it doesn't look exactly the same. All right, and then I'm going to Shift D again, rotate it again. Shift D. All right, there you go. You have the base for it. I mean, we can do the same thing here with, you can add the modifier, oops, wrong one, and subdivision service, and just make the, in the edits. And it's essentially the same thing that we're doing, creating the handle on the side. Okay. So. Okay, that's good to start with. And all right, so I guess we're gonna stop here for today. And next workshop, we're going to make the block of wood on the side here to close the whole grate. And then we're going to texture it, and we're going to render it. All right, so thank you for coming, and hopefully this will help you to start with the program. And hopefully you'll be able to learn something from this workshop. If you have any questions, please let me know. And then you can just write your questions, and we can talk about it the next workshop before we start doing the other, before we start like finishing up our model. All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Leon. So yeah, there's one question that I thought we could just address. And how did you get to see the view with the camera? That was one of the early questions. How do you click to see the camera view?
To the right side here, to toggle the camera view on the right of the screen here, or the numpad 0 for shortcut key. Is that it?
Yeah, I think that was exactly the question. Yeah, but I think when you place the camera earlier, that's the same idea, right? That's, I think, where the question came up, when you had the camera and you placed it, and then to see the view of where you placed the camera.
And then that's where the camera is looking at. So if you move the camera to here, let's say, right? If you go, and that will be on a different camera angle. So when you move the camera anywhere, same thing like how you move the objects, except that you don't want to move it too far. You want to center on your object. Okay. Any other?
No, I think yeah, I'm just looking. There's just a question here. Workaround for marking seams and unwrapping.
We're going to touch that the next sections, the next
Okay.
workshop, because I haven't really go to that area yet because we haven't finished modeling it. That will be for next sessions where we're going to finish modeling, and then we're going to unwrap the skin of the object, and then we can texture.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's great, Leon. Thank you very much for the session. And yeah, just like what Leon's saying too, you know, you'll be able to join us next Saturday, where we will be doing the part two of this. So here, let me just put this on here. So yeah, so next Saturday, we will have part two, and you can you know, add any questions to here as well. So this stays live in terms of adding questions, which is the great thing. So you can type in questions and you know, any kind of and then Leon and I can go over those even before. And so part two is next week, Saturday, and same time. If you haven't registered for it yet, you just go to events.tbmcs.ca and you can register right there and then join us for that. Again, this is recorded. You can rewatch it on Crowdcast, so by registering and being part of this. And if you've registered and you happen to miss the live session, you can always come into it and watch it later as well. So don't feel, you know, if it doesn't work for your schedule, it's you know, non linear in a way, so you can watch it again later. So yeah, so thanks again to all of our partners in making this happen. We have the Canada Council for the Arts, and then we have our library partners. So the Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. So thanks again. Thanks to Leon. And we will see you next Saturday for some more 3D animation. I hope that was a great intro. I actually absorbed a lot of new information, so really, it's really cool to see this all broken down and see how the software works. So if you haven't downloaded blender.org, you can find it there. And otherwise, have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you guys next Saturday. Take care.